So, hi everyone. I'm here with Huw Vaughan, who's the Knowledge and Insights lead from Exus. And Huw, are you guys very grateful you guys for sponsoring the survey this last year? And I suppose we've now got a first cut of some of the results for 2025. And I suppose we just wanted to just chat through it for folks and just see sort of like where we kind of landed. And I know you've seen like an earlier kind of version of it. And so really just to get your reaction and talk about some of the topics that have kind of come up really.
Yeah, well, I think first of all, thanks for, as always, for producing this survey in conjunction with us, Chris, because, I think it gives us some really useful information for not just ourselves, obviously, and for yourself, but for our customers and potential customers as well. It's always nice to see, what's going on in collections and recoveries, particularly if it's in different regions as well. So, there's also some benchmarking information here as well, which folks might prove interesting and useful for them. I think really there's a lot of interesting stuff here, and I know the intention is for us to go through this session slide by slide, which I think is really, really important. And when I was looking at it, really the first three slides which and bits of information which intrigued me were around the arrears trends, digital transformation and AI, and contact channels and customer engagement. So and then I know we look into some of the regulatory impacts, operational benchmarks later on, but those first three elements are always interesting, and were particularly interesting this time. So yeah.
I mean, as you say, the first one was really around, I suppose, arrears trends and sort of some of the challenges really around that. I mean, it did kind of feel like, arrears are sort of have been increasing, and we did some comparison around where it was versus previous reports. I think this is the third or the fourth year we've kind of done this now.
Yeah.
It does feel like arrears. And I remember this is globally as well, not just one market. It just feels like generally the sentiment is that arrears are rising, and they've continued to rise. And then I suppose just some of the challenges there, I suppose, as well, which is right. Food costs sort of came up, indebtedness. I mean, some of the categories you'd kind of expect. I mean, did that kind of surprise you at all?
Not really. I mean, I guess, we always hear about the fact that arrears are rising or potentially rising. And I think what this is starting to tell us is that, families generally are being squeezed on their income, and, the cost of living is truly starting to bite. And I think, what we've got to also bear in mind is the fact that this data was collated before the actual conflict started in the Middle East. And I'm sure many of the people listening to this and viewing this webinar will be aware of some of the impacts that that's having globally, and obviously the impact it's going to have on further costs for customers, and squeezing people's ability to pay their bills, particularly when you look at this. We've got fuel costs there, which were sort of not having such an impact, but clearly that's going to have a significant impact. Energy costs, that's going to go up even further later this year. And of course, the transportation costs and getting food into shops, etc., that's going to have another impact. So yeah, I think you've got this crisis in the Middle East, which is having a massive impact, obviously. And then you've still got impacts locally. So if you take the UK, I was watching a program of this week, Panorama, on the cost of living, and it was just taking normal families, regular families on good incomes, not terrible incomes in any way, shape, or form. 2 kids, they were explaining that the things that they used to do in the past and took for granted, nowadays they're not. They're thinking a lot harder about the way they spend their money, and making clear decisions about what's important and what's not, and having to manage their finances around that, which they've never had to do before. And so it was interesting to hear that, and also realize the cost of things. Yeah, I mean, I'm in one way I'm lucky, I suppose, because I don't anymore have young kids. Yeah, and these were with sort of families with young children. And I did feel for them, that you're constantly having to look at the cost of things, and make decisions which affect your children and your family. So I think we're really beginning to see that squeeze, and I don't see it obviously getting any better any soon.
I mean, certainly if you look at the outlook, and I know you've got quite a lot of clients in the Middle East and sort of like, I mean, they're being directly impacted by it. But then if you look at the knock-on impact of some of that that's kind of happening in terms of fuel costs you mentioned, but also there are other things. So things like supply of helium, there are all sorts of like other things that are going to happen. I mean, what do you think we need to do, I suppose, to just prepare for some of that? Because we don't. I mean, it's all so new. We don't necessarily know what the impact's going to be yet, but we've got to prepare for it. I mean, it seems likely that we're going to see some negative impact for consumers, more so than we've seen already, even in this report.
Well, that's an interesting comment. I mean, one of the things that I did before we sort of agreed to have this webinar was sort of reach out and find out what the impact was on our customers in the Middle East themselves. Yeah. And the point being that I think this is something that maybe businesses in other regions need to think about, because we've got a number of customers there, and they've completely changed their outlook now. Obviously, it's taken them a little bit by surprise, I think, and their focus is very much on disaster recovery and business contingency planning. So they pretty much stopped doing anything else. Yeah, it's brought everything else to a grinding halt, and they're looking at how they sort of plan and how they deal with the current situation, but plan for future events as well. So, I think it's yet another cautionary tale about, businesses having that operational resiliency to an ever-changing sort of global environment. So,
Mm.
making sure that you have all of these things in place above and beyond everything else you've got to do, which is the day-to-day business, and of course, there are things that happen there which we don't think about, notwithstanding obviously the human element of all of this. But AWS has data centers in that region, and they've been specifically targeted and damaged, and that's caused disruption within the region itself. So those are things that we would probably never think of. But
Yeah,
what happens if it happens to us?
yeah. Well, and I suppose for us, in terms of though if we're not, it's not directly happening to us at the moment, is really around, what do we need to do now in terms of like doing the groundwork in terms of prepping potentially for economic crisis that might come down the pipe at us, and do we have the right business continuation sort of planning or playbook, I suppose, just to prep for some of that, as well as BCP, I suppose, for if it does
Yeah.
directly sort of start to impact us in other markets. So
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think in terms of thinking about what we could be doing, what people could be doing, I think the next slide, which we start to look at the customer contact and engagement, it was really interesting for me as well.
yeah, I mean, this one here was digital transformation and AI,
Yeah.
which was the next one kind
Sorry.
of up.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I mean, so in terms of like, I mean, this has been a hot topic, I suppose, for for the last year or so, I suppose, really, especially with the AI piece as well. I mean, what's kind of interesting is definitely there seems to be increasing adoption of AI, increasing digital sort of first kind of approach. Challenges is really around that, I suppose, things that we sort of know about. So things like legacy integration, I suppose, how do we integrate some of this stuff into what are legacy systems, and we've all kind of got excited about it, but I suppose it kind of feels that we're at the point now where we're having to implement it, and having to implement it in live systems with customers and financial systems in regulated markets as well, and that can be quite a lot different from playing with the stuff at home in terms of security, cyber security,
Yeah.
data security, the privacy, those kind of things. And so it kind of feels like we're turning the corner, really. And I suppose in some of the challenges, things like, legacy integration, data privacy, those kind of things are very real business challenges that we have when you do this sort of live on customer kind of systems. That was my kind of take from it, at least anyway. We're
Yeah.
getting to the implementation stage.
Yeah, I think so. And what's interesting is that is probably people are finding that out as they go along, right? So, as all of this new technology starts to land and starts to be put into use, folks are suddenly starting to realize that it maybe isn't as easy as people are making it out. I mean, let's be fair, you and I have discussed this a number of times over the course of the last 6-7 months. Everything's AI now, everything's AI native, everything's AI collections platform, this, that, and the other. Which is great, on the tin, but is it actually doing what it says on the tin when it comes to the implementation? As you say, there's a lot more that goes into that than meets the eye. for me, obviously, that is an interesting point. Going back to what we were just previously discussing here, something that, again, I think we've seen before in the past, and it comes down to this predictive modeling and vulnerability detection. Using models to actually try and make life easier for you and your customers. In terms of making sure that you're proactively identifying vulnerable customers, and then designing strategies and customer journeys that are fit for purpose for those particular customers. And for me, that's about preparedness, right? So making sure that you're preparing for what could happen from an economic perspective and to your delinquency portfolio over the coming months, during the rest of 2026 in particular. And it always surprises me when I look at the data that we get back, when I see predictive modeling and vulnerability at this end of the sort of on the right hand side of this chart, when theoretically I would love to see it on the left hand side of the chart, that people are doing the analytics ahead of anything else, because for me that has always been the starting, that is always the starting point, understanding your portfolios and your customers, and then you start to sort of execute the strategies and the journeys, the channels that you've got available to you.
I mean, these ones on the bottom are sort of giving some of the use cases which people are sort of like flagging out, which I do think is kind of interesting in terms of, I mean, as you say, predictive modeling is sort of on the right-hand side there, but it's just in terms of like the type of where people are starting to use it, and and again, they seem sort of like they're very sort of like operational things, like things we actually understand, and sort of like trying to help with our processes to a certain extent, which is kind of interesting. The data subject to your data point as well, which I think is kind of interesting, was like, data is kind of key to it, and should that be further up on the left hand side? Maybe that's a shift we'll see in future kind of years. Just moving on to the next one around contact channels. I mean, you mentioned this before, in terms of like where we kind of sit in terms of like effectiveness of contact channels. What surprises me on this is always like just how dominant telephony still is. I mean, so we you and I, we chat quite a bit around sort of like digital communications, the AI stuff we just chatted about, but telephony is always important. You see this in other surveys elsewhere, and so it kind of like in some ways shouldn't be the forgotten channel, I suppose, to a certain extent. But it is kind of important. But what you do also see versus previous years is this whole digital piece starting to increase as well and improve as well, which is kind of interesting as well. I mean, you sort of see that sort of shift to digital first, but maybe on a more of a blended kind of basis. I don't know what your thoughts were around contact channels, and particularly if there are any kind of new channels as well you think we're going to kind of see.
Yeah, well, the first thing that I took away when I looked at this slide, and I think part of it was because I'd been at an event earlier this week where it was clear that people that are involved in collections operations have a massive challenge, just day to day, from a regulatory point of view, from running the business. There's so many things that are involved in trying to get things right for your customers. And for me, the first thing is look at all those different channels that are available. And there probably are a lot others that we've not got here. But it's, how do you design the optimum sort of journeys for your customers at the end of the day out of all of that, which goes back to my previous point about trying to get the analytics right, and moving probably even to a prescriptive modeling base, so that you can start to make more sense of some of these channels. And all of this is not easy to do. It is very complex. But that was my first takeaway from this was, look, it's all well and good. We know about outbound telephony. I saw another survey the other day on LinkedIn, which was indicating that email, again, is still one of the most popular channels. So I don't think that some of this should surprise us. I mean, we're starting to see, AI come into this more and more as we've sort of progressed this survey, which is good. But I think it's how you use all these channels, and that's the big challenge, right, for me.
If you just look at this graph on the right here around sort of like initial contact channels, tend to be digital. Then as you sort of get into getting hold of people not before, prompting customer action. Like digital seems to be further up the chain, and you sort of like starting to see this moving down as well. So
Yeah,
digital becoming more popular, but these like late stage, once you get into that negotiation piece, getting higher payment amounts, yeah, I mean that's where the agent piece still feels like people reliant on that empathy and the warmth, but getting hold of people, which is the first stage to engagement, is digital. Seems like that's quite effective, at least on
yeah,
a
and I think that's
on that kind of
something that.
basis.
Sorry to interrupt, talk over you there, but I mean, I think from a practitioner point of view, this is something that you know we've been talking about for a long, long time, right? Which is, as you introduce easier to use channels, more self-service options through the various channels, that is going to have a freeing up effect. So that it allows you to take some of that sort of, I guess, easier customer scenarios to deal with through the digital channels, and then obviously you have the resource then that enables your agents to have longer and better quality conversations if they're needed to help customers that really do need their help, right? So I think this actually confirms that people are actually starting to adopt that, probably talking about it for a while, but it indicates that digital channels are really, really well embedded now in many organizations, and they're starting to see the benefits of that, not so much in cost reduction, but more in the redeployment of agents and allowing them to do a better job for their customers where and when they need it.
I mean, also, I suppose that piece around sort of reaching uncontacted customers is an effective way of doing that, as well as a cheap way of sort of being able to do more as well. So, I mean,
Yeah,
it's sort of though that might not be taking cost out, it's probably making you more effective in terms of getting more engagement
yeah,
overall.
yeah, exactly. From just touching on the regulatory side of things there as well. I found this quite interesting, and again, this will be probably regionally. It's just the previous slide, Chris. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. Yeah, just at the bottom there, looking at how, how vulnerable customers are, um, uh, I guess, managed from a more strategic point of view. Yeah, is it just through regulation? Is it just through a company, or just, it's just part of the day-to-day process? And I guess there's some regional differences here. Certainly from the session that Kevin still ran earlier this week, it fills me with confidence when I compare the UK, for example, with other markets in terms of regulation and how robust it is. And whilst I know that many firms still feel that it's quite onerous and tough, and I'm sure it is, it is worthwhile in my opinion. I think the regulation is very good. It makes sure that vulnerable customers are treated in the right way, and that the firms are doing their best to deliver the right outcomes. What's interesting is that 40% still just see the treatment of vulnerable customers as just another process, which was quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean there are some market differences, and certainly when we looked across, various markets in terms of like particularly this area of legislation or regulation kind of does change quite a bit
Yeah,
in terms of what's required versus not. And so I mean it's kind of interesting in terms of like how much the regulators will start to align. What is interesting though when you look at the different markets is how a lot of them have similar regulation. I mean it's kind of like the evidencing and the depth of it that seems to kind of change to a certain extent.
yeah,
Um, um, so I mean, so on regulation was the next slide as well. Just in terms of like where we are. I mean, there's concerns there around regulatory burden and the fact we're just talking about like the volume of regulation that comes out or compliance that comes out. And I suppose that's definitely a theme. I think you see the digital theme coming through on this slide as well. Yeah, and I suppose we were talking a little bit around perception of the industry as well, which is, I think we've made some inroads in that, but that's still sort of like a sticky kind of feedback, I suppose we get, particularly in collections around, are we supporting customers versus, I suppose, collecting on customers, and that sort of links into that kind of regulatory kind of aspect as well.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess even with all the regulation though and all the best endeavours, still quite interesting to see only 21% have a positive perception of the industry. Now that may be because we all work in an environment which is very stressful for customers, and they can't it must be very difficult when you're in that situation to feel as though everything's good, as it were, when you get a good experience, because you've still maybe got a bigger issue with your finances. But yeah, even with the best endeavours, 21% is quite low. So it just indicates that, again, whilst there's probably some regional variances here, still a lot of work to do in terms of improving industry industry reputation and the way that people view what we do in the collection space, the debt management space.
I mean, the other research that's been out there is saying sort of obviously there might be a negative perception around some of the industry and some of the processes, but usually when you then get to talk with someone, it's at that point when then that can turn around to being positive. But the
Yes.
vast majority of people don't get to talk to people in collections, so that it does get skewed somewhat by the fact that people have misconceptions around it. And the people who actually go through the process then change their perceptions of it. But it is something that needs to be worked on, because it sort of stops engagement. So if there is a misconception, then it stops engagement because people are afraid of it. And how do we sort of break some of that stuff down, which I think digital kind of helps with it to a certain extent.
Yeah, and AI as well. I think if we look at this, just going back to the point there about AI adoption accelerating, it's clear that AI can really help businesses and collections operations improve what they do. So even if there's a good standard at the moment, it can get better. So at the event with IPI this week, they demoed some of the stuff that they're doing, and it's stuff that we at Exus are working on as well. So it's not unique, but to see it in action is just a great reminder of how it helps. Stuff like QA automation. So that's a big help for operations to get through more calls and to listen to what's going on, to give more and better feedback to agents, to have better conversations. Speech and text analytics. So sentiment analysis, for example. Using all of that to feed back to agents as well as part of the QA process. And then agent co-pilot as well. So using those types of tools to help agents through difficult conversations, and making sure that they arrive at the outcome with the customer feeling that they've had a good experience and a constructive experience. It's out there and it's being used, which is good to see. And I can only see a lot of good coming from that side of the AI equation at the moment.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. So the other thing we sort of did, I suppose, as part of the as part of the review is obviously it captures some comments as well. And I think increasingly the comments are becoming more interesting, and particularly as you can use AI to sort of summarize some of them here as well. So this was quite a good kind of summary, I think, around what people were saying. So things like affordability pressure increasing, and the customers are starting to tell us there as well, which I think is, we talked about that in terms of arrears levels.
Yeah.
Digital being the direction of travel, but we've got to try and get trust around using it in some kind of quarters. AI moving to deployment, and some of the constraints around that of course there come real world complexities around putting some of this stuff in. But I mean, there's definitely the wills there. We're now getting into the detail to actually do it, and then operational transformation and and I suppose then looking forward, it's things like personalization, right? So it's like, how do we use some of this technology and the data to better sort of personalize our experience in terms of the collections process.
Yeah, and it's it says there the proactive intervention as well, which is about the going back to some of the stuff we spoke at the beginning about the vulnerability identification of customers. Yeah.
So I mean, it feels like we're on the sort of the same path. I mean, maybe it's not. I'm not sure if this is a surprise as much as now we actually have to implement some of this as well, which is we're getting into how do you do that, and I suppose how do we understand the complexities of it? It's not just something that happens by magic, and then I suppose the technology firms then in terms of making this happen actually on the ground, which I know you guys are kind of involved in.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, this obviously is just a summary in many respects of what we've already talked about. Okay, I think if we're, and it almost sort of in some respects you go down the list and you can see that it's almost like a journey in itself, right? So if we look at the bottom here where we've got the future is personalization, proactive intervention, and customer financial well-being. We're almost moving into that place where everybody identifies where they want to get to. So you could call it a vision of where they want to get to. And then the other sort of 4, 3, 2, and 1 on this list are almost like enabling elements of that. Yeah. Now, I guess for me, it's how you plan all of this stuff, and what becomes, what is important to you to help you get to your vision, right? So we all know that it's all very well having a vision, but unless you've got an underpinning strategy and a plan to deliver that, then you're probably going to be just struggling to deliver on that final vision. But for me, the things at the bottom are there, that they're all well and good, but you need to take the step-by-step approach to getting to that end point, basically.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting. So, I mean, so in the rest of the pack, and we'll make sure that we share the pack with folks. We've also got we've obviously got a comparison versus previous years. It's now what the third is actually. I think it's the fourth year we've actually run it. But it's we've now got comparison versus previous years. Again, looking through some of these and sort of like seeing how this this kind of changes, and you can sort of start to see things like, for example, on this slide here, how AI adoption is sort of advancing and sort of and those kind of things as well. So what we'll do is we'll send out the pack. And what I was going to last say is, like, we're leaving the survey sort of running, and sort of there's a time cutoff obviously for 2025, but obviously we've had so many events that are kind of going on in the world. Is one of the things we were chatting about was kind of interesting in terms of like, have things changed and do things change throughout the year when things are moving so fast? So is there a change between Q1 this year and Q3 this year, as an example, just to understand what's changing from a sentiment point of view? So if people click on the link here, they'll get access to the questions. Obviously, you can get a copy of this particular survey then as well, so we'll make sure that's available for folks as well. And we'll continue to gather data, I think, Huw, and that was what we were chatting about, really to see sort of like see how this changes within 2026, and really over the balance of the year, and obviously then that will lead up to the survey for next year as well. So
No, I
that's
think
kind of where we are.
Yeah, and I think it would be really good for us to sort of look at this a little bit more dynamically and give people sort of that feedback in a little bit more real time. It obviously won't be real time, but it's more sort of, I guess, current and up to date, and we'll be taking account of the things that are happening around us, but which are out of our control, right? So, which I always find is quite interesting for people to understand, and also to help people plan for what's coming down the pipe towards them, right? So what's on the horizon? If we're able to help, give people that view and provide some of those insights that will help them have conversations within their businesses, that can only be something that's a good thing to do, right?
Well, fantastic. Yeah. Well, Huw, thanks very much. Thanks very much again for sponsoring, but also, for this conversation as well, sort of getting a bit of like real world insight into some of the things that I suppose people are reporting back from their time sort of on the ground. And it sounds like it's very similar to some of the things that you're hearing, but also the direction of travel. We can start to see some of the direction of travel in terms of as this stuff kind of rolls out. So Huw, thanks very much.
No, thanks, Chris. Always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
And as I say, fill out the survey and get a copy of the report, and then you can pour over the detail and stuff as well. So thanks very much.